it's Sherry here from Scrapbooking.Life, and today we're going to be working on our January magnetic calendar from Foundations Decor. So let me go over some of the products you're going to need, and then we'll jump right into the project itself. So here's what I used, and of course you can vary it any way you'd like, but you will definitely need a magnetic frame. It comes in black or white. I use the black at my house, but this is what the white one looks like, so you can choose either one. Both of them come with all your numbers that you'll need, some additional tiles for any blank spaces, like this is the month of January. You also come with some additional icons. We'll be doing one of those each month to coordinate with our calendars. So those come with your calendar set when you get the kit, okay? What does not come with it, and the part that you'll need, are the different months. So this is the month of January. It comes in a kit, and when I say the kit, I mean it comes with everything wood-wise or MDF board and your magnets to make these pieces. So that's everything in this kit. So there's one for January through December. In your magnetic frame, you will get the calendar that shows you all the different ones. They also do have some additional calendar tiles with balloons and presents, snowman, that kind of thing. That's the big day tile set. So that is an addition. If you'd like to purchase those, they are available through Foundations Decor, and there'll be a link again if you want to do the big days tile set. But you do get some with your calendar kit. Okay, so what else will you need? In order to be prepared for the class itself and to watch the video and complete it with me, you will need several things. You will need paper. I used the I Love Winter kit by Lori Whitlock. It was produced by Echo Park Paper. Again, all the links will be available on the site. So you just need to click on those links. They'll take you to where you can purchase them if you want to use this paper. If you don't want to use it, that's fine. Pick out one that you do like. Just make sure it has a variety of paper patterns and not patterns that are all really big. You're going to need some smaller patterns in there also. But I really like this I Love Winter paper. Then you'll want a few extra things to go with your paper pack. You'll want some coordinating paints. So I chose to use the Tim Holtz paints. I like these. Fossil Amber is what I used to get my yellow. In order to get the blue shade that I needed, I actually used Faded Jeans, Chipped Sapphire, and Ground Espresso. I mixed those to get the blue color to match. And when I'm painting these edges, and I painted the snowman's face. You can also paper the face if you prefer, but either way, you're still going to want to paint those edges so that it looks complete. So those are what I used. I also used Crackling Campfire for his nose. And then the red, I used Barn Door and mixed a little bit of Ground Espresso to get the darker color that I wanted, as well as Picket Fence, which is the white color. Now you can use any paint you like, but that's what I use in the video if you want to follow along with me. The other things that I used were my Distress Ink Re-Inker and a sponge. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I just take a round sponge and cut it into sections like pie, and that's what you're going to be using. So something you can use, they rinse out, and you can use them over and over again, but you'll need a sponge and some vintage photo. You'll also need some adhesive. So I use Mod Podge. I use the matte finish because I don't want it to look shiny if it ends up showing on my paper. To adhere paper to paper, I use my Zig two-way glue. That's what I like the best. And then wood to paper, I also use Tacky glue if it's something I just want to stick down. So these large icons are stuck down with my Tacky glue. Before I paint, I do seal my MDF with clear Gesso. I use the Liquitex brand. That's just what I prefer. But that makes you not have to use so many coats of paint if you're using a light color like the yellow. It takes 2 coats. If you don't use the Gesso, it can take up to 4 to really get a good color to it so it doesn't look like it's bleeding through. MDF board is a little harder to cover. It soaks in your paint, so the Gesso helps just kind of seal it and prepare it. The other things I used were my vintage photo ink to distress my paper, as well as my round applicator with a foam applicator brush there. I also used my Spun Sugar ink, and I did that to get the highlights on the snowman's face to give him a few little cheekies there. As far as tools, you'll need the large paper file by Foundations Decor. I also used a small file, and I used the precision texture tool, and I used the one with the flat edge to get into some small areas. I also used my embossing tool, and I used that to do the dots on my paint and in his eyes. I used my tweezers, a pencil, scissors. I used a brayer, and doesn't matter what brand, as long as you can, and that's mainly if you don't have a lot of pressure in your hands. I like to use it to get an even kilter. You will need some paper towels and water, and some paint brushes for acrylic paints. After that, I also used Stickles, and I used the Crystal Stickles, which is number 1782. If you have the older Stickles, it's not written here, it's just on the side, but it was 1782 was the number. And then I also used some enamel dots. I used the Foundations Decor brand, but any brand will do. You just want a round dot, and that's what I used for his eyes. So I think that's pretty much all the tools you're going to need. I did use an eyeshadow applicator as well. So I think that's all the tools you're going to need to complete the project. So if you want to gather those up, we'll get started. To complete our project, the Foundations Decor January Calendar Kit, go ahead and grab out your calendar kit and your I Love Winter paper pack. That's what we're going to be using first. Okay, so I'm going to grab those. The first thing I'm going to do is unpack this kit from Foundations Decor. Now, as you know, the frame is magnetic, so you're just switching it out every month, so there's nothing to do with the frame. I usually save my piece of paper so that I can look back at the example that Foundations Decor provided, even though ours is going to be a little bit different. These are your magnets. You're going to set them aside somewhere special, but you're not going to need them to the very end. That came from right there. So each month there's a different magnetic set. We'll be going through all the different sets. Of course, we're starting with January. So I'm going to hold on to that just so I have it as a guide. So I'm going to set it aside. So the first thing for Foundations Decor I recommend is deciding what papers you're going to be using for each one. But before you tear all of these things apart, because that's what the first thing we want to do is just start moving things around, is mark what the top is. So I know this one doesn't have a lot of pieces, but as you move through the Foundations Decor line, some of them do have more small pieces, and it does matter which side is up. So I'm going to put an X. We're going to be covering these with paper in a little while, or paint. So it really doesn't matter that the X is there. We're going to go ahead and mark those so we know which one is the top, which one's facing up. The snowflakes is not as important, so I wouldn't bother marking those. And of course, January is going to spell out January, so that's not that complicated. Another thing I would do is with a pencil, you're going to line this up and mark to make sure that when you go to paint, you are covering the spaces that are not going to be behind, that you don't paint short, or you don't cut your paper short of where you need it to be. And that'll make more sense to you here in a little bit. We're not going to be about the placement of the nose. Now that we have done that, we've marked our spaces. To avoid getting paint all over us, we are going to leave this attached so that we may paint it without having to hold it in our hands. That way you can get a quick layer of paint on there without getting sticky, and it has a place for it to dry. So just follow along with me. I'm going to be painting. As I am painting, I am using the Distress paints, which are from the Tim Holtz line. So they match well with my inks. Some of them have the flip cap. That's the newest way to get them. If you've got some of the older ones, literally I'm not using the dauber end. I'm literally opening them up. I'm putting them into a paint tray like this to paint out of. Okay, so this is my Fossilized Amber. I'm also using Barn Door. Crackling Campfire is the orange I'm using for the nose here. Ground Espresso. And I'm using two blues. I'm actually mixing them so I can get the right color that matches my paper. Now, if you're using the same paper pack as I am, what I'm doing is using 1/3 Chipped Sapphire, 1/3 Faded Jeans, 1/3 Ground Espresso, so that I can get this dark blue polka dot color for my snowman when we get ready to paint him. So I'm just painting my edges. Now, some of you are going to say, oh my gosh, she's OCD, she's painting everything. And you are right, I am. I do paint everything. I paint the edges. Some people don't, and that's okay. You can do it any way you want. At our shop, we told people do it however you want to do it, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm OCD, so I paint all those edges. So you'll see me painting. You go ahead and paint your stuff as well. If you want to pause the video, you can. If you want to fast forward through this part, you can do that as well. We do speed up the video, so you probably will have to pause at some point, okay? I also do coat everything in Gesso first so that it does not take as many coats of paint to cover my images. So I'm going to just use this Liquitex Gesso. Now it looks white here, but it actually is clear. It just creates a coat so it doesn't absorb everything quite so quickly. So I'm going to do that real quick. Because the Gesso goes on clear, you just basically want to get a good coat on it so it can cover up those edges. Once it dries, I mean, you won't even be tell that it's even there, really. Now, for those of you who use like an acrylic medium, that is to make your paint go further. So you would mix that medium in with your paint, where Gesso creates a canvas, basically, for you to work on top of. So don't pull the acrylic medium out. That's not what you're looking for. Now, you could put an undercoat of just white or black, and then when you sand your edges, that color would show through. If you want to do a two-tone, you can do that. On ours, the technique we're going to use just in a little bit is we're painting them, but then we're going to go back over with a little bit of ink and a sponge just to create kind of a speckled effect on them. So we'll be doing that in a little while. And when I say a little while, that's probably an hour from now. So this is not the fastest project you will ever do. It is requires a little patience. But I love the result. Now, so for those of you who followed along and did the shadow boxes that we did last year, these, we're using the same some of the same paper packs, if they're still available, as we did in last year's series. So if you've got some paper left over from doing that, pull that paper pack out, and that way all your stuff will match. I'm very big on matching and coordinate, not necessarily matching, but coordinating our pieces so that we have a real nice home decor look. Now, if you glob, make sure you get those globs up. 2 thin coats is actually better than 1 thick one when it comes to painting, but also with Gesso. Now this one, I'm not going to Gesso anything but just the sides because we're going to be covering this with paper. So if you're covering your pieces with paper, you don't have to worry about it. Also remember, Foundations Decor does offer SVG files that you can purchase. When you purchase on Foundations Decor website, they have a coordinating SVG cut file that will cut all your paper pieces for you if you choose to purchase it. When you purchase your calendar set, you have the option of purchasing for 99 cents so that you can cut all your pieces with no problem. I like to use the file. I do get the SVG files. I usually use them on scrapbook pages, the snowman or the snowflakes or whatever, because it's only 99 cents and you can't go wrong with an SVG file for 99 cents. So I don't use them necessarily on this. So the videos that you see me do, unless it's something really intricate, I'm probably going to continue to use the file and the texture files. But you can purchase the SVG files so that you could cut them on your Cricut or Brother Skin and Cut or Silhouette, whatever it is that you have. So one big thing about filing is you want to make sure you get all that residue off. It will show through your paint. So if you're just painting your snowman's face and you're not going to paper, You'll want to make sure that you really file that down to get that residue off. I'm going to take it off screen for a minute, just go and dump it in the trash. And wipe off my little area here. Usually I would do that over a trash can, but I wanted you to see if you go to paint over that and there's residue left, it's going to show through your paint as a little raised area, almost like he has a pimple. So you want to make sure you get all of that off. And off screen, all I did was wipe that off with my paper towel. So in this sample, this is paint, and I put a clear coat of gesso, and then I just went over it with white paint, and I distressed the edges with distress ink. During this video, I am going to cover him with paper on the face, just so you can see what that's like, how you paper piece something like that together. So I will be covering this one with paper. The one I did in the sample, actually I painted it with white paint, picket fence paint, and then I just distressed the edges. But on this one, I'm going to show you how to paper piece that whole thing. So there'll actually be a piece of paper there this time, just so you'll know how to do both techniques. So since we're not going to do anything but the edges, again, I'm just going to paint our edges with the gesso to just seal that up, just to make it easier, so it won't take so many coats. This is actually MDF board. It's going to soak up some of your paint as you go, so this is just a step. So if you're just using paint, you're not going to use the gesso. You would just go ahead and paint your colors, making sure that you get at least a little bit on the edge here with your paint, so that if if your paper's cut a little bit short or you file a little bit too much, you're not going to just end up with a blank space almost. It'll make more sense to you as we're putting it together. Now, I do not gesso the big blocks, these pieces. These are your background pieces. This is what sits into your shadow box, so no one actually ever sees the edges. While I am OCD, I don't like doing a lot of extra work that I don't need to do. So now that we are done with our gesso, we're going to set these aside so they can dry. And the pieces that we've started to take apart, I'm going to set over here. And now we can prep our boards. So what I'm doing, and some of this is going to be done off screen, again, you want to get those dots off there and get any residue you can. Less sticky, the better. And so I'm just going to sweep that off into my trash can. And I'm just using one of the paper files from Foundations Decor. The cool thing about these is you can wash them off. Now, you don't want to soak them necessarily, but you can wash them off to get some of the color or residue off. And they'll last quite a long time. I have a large one. I also have a small one to get into smaller spaces. So once I have my pieces down to this, then that's where we're going to worry about or start figuring out where our papers are going to go. So I know that this goes with my snowman piece. I'm going to set them together. That might be off camera for you. These should be just about dry. And I'm not going to take those off yet, and I'm going to show you why. Same thing with this one. They should be dry, though, where you can actually work with them. So what I do is I consistently work on my project, although things do have to dry. Okay, so while something's drying, I set it to the side, and I'll go back and pick it up later. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint my word January. I had originally painted them in this color on the sample. I'm going to go back to that. You'll notice this is Fossilized amber paint. I've got vintage photo ink on top of that just to give it a speckled look. And then I used a stylus and put some red dots there just to give it some color. The background's got some glitter with Stickles, and I'll show you how to do all of those. But again, it's a step-by-step process. So we're going to work on January a little bit. We'll set it to the side and maybe pick up a snowflake and then just keep working around until we get all of our pieces done. Again, if you don't want to do it like mine, feel free to pick the colors that you do want to use. Now eventually I'm going to put Stickles over the top of these. And so I'm just trying to get a good white coat of paint over all the edges. But eventually we are going to cover up the top. So we just want a white background because it would still show the dark. If we left it and just put white Stickles over the top, you would still see it. It would turn it really dark. So we want that white coat of paint to keep it from discoloring our project. Now for this little guy, our snowman, what I know is that this eventually will turn into a white color. His hat is blue and his scarf, you'll see I painted the edges blue. This, however, I painted the edges red, and on the pom-pom, what I call the pom-pom ball there, I put red on the edge of it as well. So for right now, we're just going to focus on the white portion. And this time I am going to be covering his face with paper. So I'm just going to paint the portion that his face would be on the outside of. And I usually bring it over a little bit again in case I cut my paper a little short. I don't want to have to try to patch that last minute to make it work. So it'd be easier to do the work now and not worry about it later. So for right now, I'm just, again, painting the edges of where the white would be. And I decided this time to cover his face with paper because my Home O project, my snowman is covered in paper. So you might want to look, if you're doing a project series, see what you have out there already. Okay, so that's enough for that. If I have any overlap, it won't be a problem. Okay, we're going to set that aside so it can dry. We'll move on to the next color. This is just orange. I'm using the Crackling Campfire, and it won't take but just a few drops of this because we're just doing such a small amount there where his nose is. So I'm just going to put 3 drops. It'll probably be way more than enough to cover his little nose. Now I did not cover this with paper. I did just solely use paint on it. And then I did distress my edges by sanding a little bit just to give a little bit of flair and panache, I guess. So for this one, we're just going to be carefully touch those edges. May need a second coat where you touched, but let's just get it started and get him out of the way because that's an easy piece to finish up. Okay, then we're going to be doing red on this piece and on this piece. Now I was trying to match the red that I was using out of the kit, and I'm trying to match this red here. And what I ended up doing was using barn door paint and just a little bit of ground espresso. Now I don't have the flip top in this one, I have the pour paint, so I'm just going to show you kind of what I mean. We don't need a lot. And I try to measure kind of by drips. So that was about 6 drips, I think, that went in there. I'd have to go back and watch the video for sure to know, but we're just going to add, and it's better to add just a little bit at a time. Mix it, see if you think it's what you're going to want to use, and then you can always go back and add more of the darker color. So I don't want to waste a lot of paint, but I do want to get a color on there so that if any of my edges do show where my paper didn't cover, or if I distress it a little too much, I've got something that's similar to what I'm using. Okay, I'm just going to set that off right there. Okay, Then for the blue, we're going to do something similar. I started with the lightest color blue. This is Faded Jeans. Again, you don't need a lot, so just a couple drops will do you. So for this one, we're just going to go around and paint the edges of his hat. Again, go over the edges a little bit. Right where it meets up with his, I was going to say skin, but his snow for his, now here, it gets a little tricky when you try to get into those little bitty places, so just be patient with yourself if you don't have a steady hand. Make sure your white's dry before you get started. If you're pretty steady, you can kind of do them both at the same time. And then we're also going to do this piece here. Now, I do save my paints until I'm totally done with my project in case I need to go back and touch something up. And what I would recommend, even if it's just overnight, you can put saran wrap over the top of them, or you can wrap them in a damp paper towel if it's just going to be an hour or two. I literally just take a paper towel, dampen it, and fold it over, set this in the center and fold it over in order to keep my paints the colors that I need. Since I mixed them, it'd be hard to go back and remix them and get an exact same match again, unless you're just really good at that. So I recommend saving your paints, especially if you're going to do another project. Like I plan to do a pickup truck and the gnomes for winter. They're also foundation crystal core projects, so those will be coming out soon on video. That's most of our painting. I'm going to go back and do the red here. I wanted to get my red on there first. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my January. It should be dry. This time I'm going to take a little bit broader brush so I can get more paint on there. And this should take easier because you've already got one layer on there, one coat. So the second coat always goes on easier than the first. Helps to cover. It's already got something there to adhere to that has the same color to it. So it should cover within 2 coats, especially if you use the Gesso. If you didn't use the Gesso, you may have to go back for a 3rd coat on the lighter colors, depending on if you're doing the edges and trying to cover up the black on the edge. But with the Gesso, you should not have to do more than 2. Now I am going to be distressing my edges of my letters a little bit later with the sanding tool, with a file. So I like that distressed look. If you do not like the distressed look, you want to make sure that you are totally covered. There is no black showing. If you want it to be without a distressed look, then make sure everything covers really well. And that might mean letting it dry up a little bit longer, getting a 3rd coat on there to really get that color to sit on top of your letters. MDF just soaks up a lot of paint. Now, one of the reasons I chose the yellow is because my gnome is going to have a yellowish colored hair, and I thought it would help it really kind of all blend together. I did not want her to look oddball. I know there's no yellow in this pack. That's why another reason we used Vintage Photo for our distress ink. It does have a little bit of a I don't know, a twang of yellow in there to help pull the yellow off. Now I'm going to get a paper towel and wrap up my paint. While these other things are drying, I'm going to set these out of my way into another workspace and wrap up my paint so we can move on to the next step. Again, all I'm doing is wrapping this in a paper towel that's been damp with water, nothing but water, just a damp paper towel. So in Florida, it's humid. It takes a little longer for things to dry than I want them to. Not that anything dries fast, especially if you're waiting on it. So make sure your area is clean, free of paint. Your hands are free of paint. And then your area is clean. You do not want your mat to still be damp though, because you're about to start working with some paper. So what we do to cover these individual pieces, we're going to start with the snowman piece, is this is a piece of paper and this is layered, just like you built a card or a scrapbook page. It's just paper layered on top of each other. So this is pretty simple and straightforward. I would love to say there's some fantastic measurement that you cut a 4x4 and it comes out exactly equal and everything's perfect in the world. The easiest way I found to do this is to take a piece of paper. So we know this is, and they're the same on each side, so you don't have to worry about Xing these pieces. As long as you know which one's the top and which one's the bottom, it's not super hard. This is a square. So for this piece, all I did was take my square and put it on a piece of paper. So if this was the piece that I wanted, if this is what I wanted it to look like, I would take this, put it here so that my good side's facing down. It's another reason you want a clean workspace. Line that up, trace around it with a pencil, and cut that out. I've already cut mine just to save time on that. So when I cut out, this is the piece that I wanted, it should fit. It's not going to be exact because you've traced around it. There's going to be a minute part sticking over on each side. So what we're going to do is put Mod Podge here, adhere this to this, and then we're going to file off the edges so that we get a square piece. You do not want this hanging over, else it will not fit in and out of your frame correctly. It would hang up and eventually would tear up your paper, and that's not what you're looking for. So I'm going to demonstrate how we do that. This is the piece of paper that I want. This is the red that's right here behind my piece. Now I've also already cut a second piece. So I flipped over my piece of paper, I traced my square, and then I cut 1/4 of an inch off each side. To me, that's the easiest way to do it because I want it to be centered on my square once I get done. Does that make sense? So if you're good at measuring eighths and all that, 16ths and all that stuff, that's the way to go. If you're not good at that, trace the square, cut 1/4 inch off each side. You can always trim it a little bit more if you decide you want to. And you'll see me checking mine. I may have to trim them as I go, but I've already cut my pieces for my background pages. But that's how you do it. You just trace around it, cut it out. And I use paper cutter, so I get a straight line. So I'm going to grab my Mod Podge. I'm using Mod Podge Matte Finish. You can purchase this from the link that I have, but you can also purchase at your local hobby store. This is a water-based glue. Now it does say sealer and finish. I do not seal my pieces with the Mod Podge. Mod Podge is glue. So eventually it would get sticky. I'm in Florida. The more humidity that we have, the paper on top would get sticky. So I don't use it as a sealer in my area. You may have better look for it as a sealer in your area if you want to seal your project. I also use a lot of glitter. So I don't want to seal over my glitter. It takes away the sheen of your glitter. So I'm just using it for the glue portion, the water-based glue. So with Mod Podge, you want to shake it up if you haven't used yours recently. And then I recommend using the same brush every time. So I have one brush that I use all the time for Mod Podge, and I make sure I rinse it out really well when I'm not using it so that it doesn't end up getting hard. If you leave it out too long, it'll get sticky and hard on you, and then you won't be able to use it for anything, whether it's paint or Mod Podge. So Mod Podge goes on white, dries clear. So you want it to be white, but you don't want it to be globby. You don't want to have clumps of it anywhere because it'll warp your paper. I mean, we're just dealing with paper here. So get a nice coating on there, but you want to make sure it's white when you go to set your project down. So what I do is I get my piece on here, my coating. I place my piece of paper onto my piece of wood. Make sure that it's covering all your edges. Again, it's going to hang over a little bit, perfectly fine. You can smooth it down with your hands. If you don't have a lot of pressure in your hands, you can use a brayer to go over. Just make sure there's no bubbles, there's nothing weird going on with it. If it oozes out the side, that means you just used a little bit too much, not a problem. And then I lay it face down for it to dry. Okay, I'm not going to file this immediately because my glue is wet. I would only make a very big mess at this point. If you notice that your paper's not exactly where you want it to be, you still have the opportunity to peel it up and move it if you want to. Mine's exactly on the edge there, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then I'm going to place it face down for it to dry. So I'm going to set that over on the other side. And I've already cut this piece of paper. I'm going to set it over to the opposite side. So as my pieces become available, I'm going to start adding my paper to them. And what I mean by available is once my paint has dried, I can then take those pieces off, file it down a little bit, and keep adding paper. So I'm going to start working through that process, and you can follow along with me. I am going to go ahead and cut for my scarf. I used this paper right here. It's just a scrap I had left over, but I really liked it. So for these pieces, my X is going to go down. I'm wanting to use this side of the paper. My X is going to go down. I'm going to trace around my piece like so. Take a pair of scissors and cut that out. And probably the hardest thing about it is just keeping a clean workspace so you don't get Mod Podge all over everything, glue, paint, everything. Just keep your space clean as you're working. Sometimes that's easier or harder to do than it is to say, but that's what I find is one of the keys to this project is keeping a clean workspace. Now these pieces, we're going to distress them after we file them. So after we get all the edges filed, then we'll worry about the distressing of these pieces. Okay, so I'm going to lay that flat down. Now I'm going to do my two pieces here. Now those pieces I did with the red, and then I went back and added glitter. So this paper did not have glitter on it to start with. It was just paper that was from the pack. I didn't really pay attention to where anything was. I literally just laid it down there and cut. So this is my X side. I'm going to flip that over. Trace around it. X side down. Trace around it. So if you're another thing about Mod Podge, if you're not going to be using it quickly, don't leave it open and on your table. What I would recommend is getting all your pieces ready and then Mod Podging all at one time. For the purpose of the video, I usually go pretty quick, so I'm just going to keep it open. But if I was going to be here for an extended period of time, I would definitely close it and keep my brush moist so I don't have any problems. But these are small pieces, so they're not hard to get ready. So there was still enough Mod Podge on my brush. Put that straight down. Now with these smaller pieces, you have a tendency to get some Mod Podge on your fingers. So make sure you stop and wash your hands. You don't want your fingers sticking to your paper and then creating a big mess is what you are trying to avoid. Or that. You don't want to do that either. Okay, so that leaves us with our snowman's face right here and our hat. So now we're going to work on our snowman's face. Now that it's nice and dry, I've cleaned off my area a little bit, washed my hands, as you can tell, in order to Kind of clean up my space. So the next thing I'm going to do, we're trying to get our snowman to look like this. This time I am going to be using paper instead of paint. It's the same principles. Paper's a little bit more complicated than the paint issue is. So I'm going to show you how to do the complicated way, or you can do the easier way with the paint, whichever way is most comfortable to you. So we've already, in our other steps, have already put the paper on his scarf. You'll see that piece there. This is his hat. The pattern's different, of course, because I didn't pay a lot of attention. And then this is the pom-pom that goes on the end. So the areas that we're looking for that are not covered yet are his hat and his face. So the only thing we're concerned about, if you'll remember, we drew that line where it sat before. We drew this line. So now we want to cut the snowman's face so that it goes from this line to this line, or past this line, and just above this line, so that we'd rather have our paper overlap where it's hidden than to have it cut short so it doesn't fit properly. So that probably sounds more complicated than what it actually is. So let me show you how I do that. This is face up. This is the part that's going to show. We want this to show. I want to use this as his face. I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to flip this over. And because of where we painted our white, we know that's where his face shows. So we can easily create a template based on where our paint is. Okay? Might be a little bit hard to see. I'm going to try to darken that with my pencil so you can see it. This is where I traced. So I'm going to drop that line down just a little bit. And then I will cut from one side to the other. Now that's not a line, that's a line you just have to draw. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. We do have a little bit of window there for opportunity to fix if you have a problem. So we're going to take that, we're going to cut it out on your pencil lines. Of course, we're drawing on the back so that your pencil lines don't show on the front. Okay, now it's going to look ugly until we get it all put together. I'm just going to be honest with you right off the bat. Okay, so we know that this goes from here to here. So everybody see that? It's going to go from, sorry, I'm used to teaching a class in person, so if I ask questions, I don't guess there's a way to get a response. But, so your paper's going to cover from here to here. So the next thing, you'll notice your scarf is going to cover the under portion. Now we've got to cut this hat piece. Now I know this isn't perfect, okay? So, but now we're going to worry about this hat piece. So we're going to set these two pieces to the side. If you're not sure which side you traced from, like which side's supposed to be your left, so you can flip it back over so that you know, okay? And it's, if you want to, you can put that this is supposed to go on the right side in case you get it confused. Okay, so this is your right side. Okay, but for right now, I'm just going to set that right there. Now we're going to worry about his hat. So for his hat portion, I'm going to flip him over because you're going to want the opposite side. And this time I'm going to trace to where the pom-pom ball starts. I'm just going to go down a little bit on that pom-pom ball. I'm going to go all the way across here to where it shows on the white. And I'm going to make sure that I get to where his cap meets right here. Now again, I'm going to draw that down just a tad so that I have more than what I actually need. Draw that across. On your pom-pom ball here, you see there's like half a pom-pom ball there. So we know it's a little bit more than what we need. That's the goal. It's kind of like paper piecing things together, is what it's called, paper piecing. You may have done this through Cricut and it cuts all the pieces for you. Again, if you bought the SVG file, it would cut some of these for you. You wouldn't have to do them by hand. So if you feel that that's a better fit for you, pause the video, go grab that SVG file and cut out the pieces that you want so that you can follow along. And you should just place, the SVG file should allow you just to place your paper right on top of your image. You wouldn't have to do all this measuring and cutting and that kind of thing. Okay, so this is basically going to sit right here once we get done. Okay, that's where it's meant to go. So now that I know where my pieces go, I'm actually going to go back and trim some of this off in just a little bit, but we're going to start putting the whole thing together. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is trim this portion by just a little bit, and instead of going around my pom-pom, I'm going to go straight down. So I can trim those two off. That way I don't have any paper overlapping outside of my pom-pom area, once I know where it fits. Now the rest of it is going to get filed off as we go through this process. I'm also going to trim mine a little bit more right here, starting right there and working my way over to that area. Just so I have a little less overlap than what I have right at the moment. Now luckily, these are just scrap pieces, so if you feel like you've messed a piece up, all you have to do is cut another little scrap piece. For your paper piecing parts, you'll want to make sure you distress these pieces before you put them down on your project. So I'm using Vintage Photo, which is one of the Tim Holtz colors, and I'm going to simply just distress my edges, especially getting into any corners. And you're going to sand some of this off, and you can go back and touch it back up. What you're not going to be sanding off is this portion right here. Okay. The cool thing about it is everybody knows when you layer and you put your cap on, there is going to be some shadowing behind that cap. So I encourage you to distress just ever so lightly, a little bit taller, than, so that it looks like it's in proportion. It actually has a shadow, if you want. Okay, so I'm going to distress that piece. I'm going to distress this piece. Same thing here. I'm going to just dress up just a tad to give him a little bit of a shadow. And dress a little bit in, just because of where his hat sits. He would look a little distressed. Okay, now for these pieces, I'm going to want to sand off my edges before I distress, or else I've kind of just wasted my time. So I'm going to take my file, and I'm going to show you here on my board, but then I'm going to move across and actually do most of mine because I don't want to make a mess. So you're going to take in your hand, hold it firmly. If you hold it too loose, you're going to end up with blisters right here where the sanding board goes across. It's double-sided. You want to hold it firmly, and you want to stroke down, not back and forth. That'll tear your paper up. So you want to go all in one direction. Just file that paper down, so that it is cutting your paper. And I like that it actually distresses my painted portions also just a tad, just enough to give it that distressed look. Weathered, I guess, is the best way. So you'll see you get a nice clean line. If you can feel your hand across there and it feels like there's no paper raised, that's what you're looking for. You want a nice smooth edge. I'm going to set that one to the side. Now these files come in two different sizes. There's a large one and there's a small one. For these, we don't really need the smaller one, but when you get into some more intricate spaces, you'll see where we use the smaller one. So I do have both. And then I also have a set of metal files I use sometimes, some texture files, and you might see me pull one of those out just to get into a small space here in a minute in that cap. So again, we're just filing that off. See how nice and smooth that looks? We're going to set that to the side. Do the same thing here. So this is a true sanding board. It sounds like a nice file, but it's sturdier than a nail file. So if you get your nails up against it, you are going to take your nails. It will sand your nails. It makes a great little emery board if you if you're in a pinch. Okay, so now that we've got that done, let me just clean off my space. And again, I usually do that over a trash can. I don't usually do it right there on my workspace, but I wanted you to see what that looks like. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to adhere the snowman's hat onto his head and let that dry for a minute. So I'm going to grab my Mod Podge and my Mod Podge brush. I'd rinsed it out since last time I used it. Took a little break there for a second. I'm going to Mod Podge onto my project. Being careful not to overlap too much, but you definitely want to get it to the edges of your project, because when you go to sand or file this, it is going to come up if you don't have it down there really well. So I'm going to place this here, and the easiest thing I found was to measure up the V in your hat to line that up, and then put your piece of paper down. And you don't, oh, it slid on me. There we go. You can see I even cut mine a little short. There's a little bit of blue paint right there. Probably won't show once I get the pom-pom on there, but okay, so we're gonna let that, we're gonna do that face down so that it can be drying, okay, without any problems. This piece eventually is going to fit right here, but we're gonna do one piece at a time. So I'm just gonna set this to the side. I'm gonna flip this over so it can be drying. And I'm going to take another damp cloth and wrap my Mod Podge brush in it when I'm working. So I just spray it down with water. I fold it up in there so I don't have to stop and rinse out my brush every time. I just set them to the side and use it over and over again. As long as you keep it damp, you won't have a problem. For the filing, we're now going to, we've done these pieces. I'm going to distress my edges. On this one. And I'm just using the mini applicator tool from Ranger with the foam dauber piece on it. There we go. So those are the 3 pieces I'm going to need for that here shortly. For his nose, I'm literally going to take my file and just kind of rough him up a little bit. See how that brown shows through from the paint is all I'm really looking for. And I am going to add some ink to it, just to give it a little bit of a look. That ink will soak into that MDF board. It also sits on top of your paint. It doesn't dry as fast on top of your paint as it does when it adheres to the MDF board. But I want it to have a little bit of color to it. I don't want it to be shiny, but I want it to have a little bit of distressed look to it. So I'll set that to the side. Again, I'm going to wipe off any filing I have in my area. Again, the biggest part of this project is just keeping a clean work area most of the time. Okay, so this is still drying. I don't want to mess with it yet, so we're going to set it to the side, and I'm going to move on to a snowflake piece. So these have had a chance to dry. I'm going to remove this by twisting it to get that foam dot out. I'm not going to try to just pry it up because I don't want to break off any of the flakes of my snowflake prongs. I don't know what those are called. Okay, so the back is not pretty. Doesn't matter because you're just going to glue it down anyway. To save your fingernails, use your file to file that off. We're going to be adding paper to it, but we still don't want it to have a bumpy look or anything. So if you've got any paint that's really lumpy, you're going to want to just file over it. I'm going to do this over my trash can. I'll show you the result when I get done. You don't have anything too major. You just want it to be smooth. So you can see where I just kind of wiped it off, filed it off a little bit to get it into a smooth situation. Okay, so for this snowflake, we're going to make this one right here first. Okay, so what we're going to do is put on our first layer of paper, which I have right here. I already cut mine. So again, you would put this face down on the back side of your paper, trace around it, and cut. Okay, now this piece was one of the cut apart pages, and I cut this section out because I like that I love winter to go across the bottom. This is actually going to sit in the center of this one. So again, you would trace around it and then cut that 1/4 inch off each side to get the framed the way you want. Key to this one was knowing where to set this. It was on a big page. So it's from this big page of cut aparts, and all I did was cut this out as a whole and then lined up to one side where I wanted it to sit and traced around it. Now on this particular one, I did trace on the front just so I could see where I was lining my piece of board up to. But for the most part, if you're going to do it, you would just use the back so that you don't have that pencil mark. But you're going to trim off a 1/4 inch either way. So you're going to be cutting off that pencil mark anyway. Hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do next is attach this to this. Okay, so I'm going to do that using my Mod Podge brush. Again, you want it to go on white. If it's clear, it's dry. Again, you don't want any major gooping, but you want to get a good coat on there. And while I'm working on mine, even when I'm designing it the first time, so I didn't just do this on the fly with y'all today on this video, I actually did have a plan. Just work on one section at a time, I think is sometimes the easiest. If you're doing it all on your own and you have your own paper pack and you're not really sure what you want to do, just take a section, work on the section, and then move to the next section. That's what I find works the best. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to stick that piece that's going to go with it eventually over here with it as well. But again, I just need to set that aside to dry along with my snowflake. If you're going to add Stickles or Nuvo drops or anything like that, you will want to wait to the very end to do that so that you don't have a mess when you get done, and I'll explain that here shortly as well. Okay, so this is the other snowflake piece. We're going to do the exact same thing over again. We're going to take those foam dots off, and that's just so it will lay flat when you get to that portion. Now these two snowflakes happen to be exactly the same, so if you get them mixed up, it's not a big deal. I'm going to sand this off over my trash can. I'm going to wipe off any debris or dust I have on there so I don't get it on my work area. And this particular one, this is actually a sticker, but these are the two pieces of paper I chose. So again, I had put this face down, traced around it, face down, traced around it, and then cut a 1/4 inch from one side and the top, and that is what gets you the 1/8 of an inch on each side. Does that make sense to everybody? So if you cut a 1/4 inch here, or cut a 1/4 of an inch there, then it will line up correctly. The one thing I like about this is from one paper pack, you could do your shadow box, you could do your calendar. It's a lot of things you could do with this project. So what I do is I save my paper pack. I bought one paper pack and I save it so that when the next project comes out, I can use it still, not use it as a scrapbook page, but I'll use it in case I want to make something else that coordinates with my projects. Of course, there's always new paper packs coming out, and you might find something that coordinates well with it, that's new and out, and you want to try something different. But I like that coordination, so I try to use the same ones over and over again until they discontinue them, and then I have to pick something new. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to put this here. I'm going to set that face down for it to dry and set all my pieces that go with it over to the side. There. Set that over to the side just to get it out of the way. I'm going to rewrap my brush so I can move on to a different portion. There we go. Now as my brush sits there, this is what I do, just to keep it damp, and that way I don't have to keep getting up to rinse out my brush either. Okay, so now for our January, if our paint is all dry, if you're not patient, you can use a drying tool. I would not use a embossing heating tool to dry acrylic paint because A, you'd have fumes, and B, it would melt the paint right off the off what you're working on. But like a heated tool or a hair dryer, something you can move around some heat pretty quickly just to get the paint to dry, but don't hold it in one place at one time. You'll want to just kind of move it around, and it's still going to smell a little bit. There's no way around that. But here in Florida, again, it's humid and it happens to be January outside, so it's a little cold as well in my scrapbooking studio. So I'm going to cheat and use this little tool to help me out a little bit. Okay, there we go. So now that I've done that, now I'm going to come and take my letters off. There's not enough room to spin them, but you want to make sure you don't break any of your letters trying to get the foam off the back. So we're just right now going to worry about getting those out. I will let you know that the N and the U, the N has got 2 on the, see that right there? That's what the difference is. Okay, so if you get them mixed up, your N has got 2 sides, where your U has just got 1 side. Took me a few minutes to figure that out when I was putting mine back together last time. So there we go. Okay, so we're going to get rid of these real quickly. Now, of course, you could just peel these off with your fingernails. I'm trying to save your fingernails. I'm going to dump those into the trash. And then I'm actually going to sand this down a little bit. So I keep telling y'all I'm sanding over the trash can, but this is what I'm doing. I'm literally just taking the flat edge and sanding that down so I don't have any clumps or bumps in my paper when I go to glue it down. And again, feel free to pause the video as you need to, or rewind, whatever it is you need to do so it to make sense for you. Okay, now you'll notice my letters are laying flat because I took the foam off the bottom, except for this little R got away from me. The rest of them are all sitting flat because I got everything else off. Okay, so what we're going to do next is Mod Podge our paper on these. Now again, I did the same thing. I'll say this one more time. Lay it flat, whatever pattern you want, put it face down, put your board on top of it, trace around it with a pencil, and cut it out. You're going to do that a second time, doing the exact same thing with the paper you want, going face down, trace around it. On this second one, because we want it to sit like it's floating inside a frame, we're going to trim 1/4 off, 1/4 of an inch off one side, 1/4 of an inch off the, off the side and off the top or bottom. 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. That will give you 1/8 of an inch on each side, so it will float in the center when we get to that portion. Okay, so I can go ahead and Mod Podge this down like so. So I use the same Mod Podge brush all the time. I put in the notes that you can use one of those foam brushes. They do really well. They cover a larger area. They're inexpensive for the most part, and you can throw them away when you get done. Eventually they will fall apart because they don't rinse well. However, if you're not good about cleaning out your brushes, you would rather you do that and just throw them away than ruin one of your nicer acrylic brushes doing Mod Podge with it. But I've been using this same Mod Podge brush now for a couple years and have not had any problems as long as I keep it damp or I keep it washed out really well. Okay, so see how that one edge, it just soaked up that Mod Podge? So you make sure you want it to be milky white when you put down your paper. brush back up. I'm going to lay this flat down so it can be drying. I'm just setting it over to the side. I'm going to move my little January pieces right up here. Okay, now my snowman hat should be dry enough that I can now file him. Okay, so this is where I was talking about the smaller file comes in handy. So the big file is great for areas you can get to easily. So the first thing I do is take my big file and get to the pieces I can get to easily because it just knocks it right out. Again, not back and forth, you just want to go straight down. So you'll notice my big file is not even going to get close to being in there, and more than likely my little file is not going to do a lot. It just won't get in there. So that's when these handy dandy tools come in play. These are called precision file tools. They're metal. They do not bend. They come in, this is a straight or a flat. They come in a set from Foundations Decor. There's a large round, which comes in great for when you do circles or like little windows and boats. And then there's two rounds, a big and a small, and then there's a flat. We're going to be using the flat for this particular project. So I'm going to take my flat file in, and I'm going to go down. Don't go up because you're going to rip your paper up. You don't want to do that. You want to go down with your file. And the main thing you want to do is that you're giving some support to your hat. You don't want to break off this portion. So you've got to support that hat as you pull that file through so that you don't break the piece you're working on. And you can do it with two hands. You can do it however you want, but just make sure you're not going to break your piece. Now, if your piece does break for some reason, whatever the reason might be, the easiest way to fix it is to use Scotch tacky glue and patience. So if this piece were to break off, I would put Scotch tacky glue on both sides, put them together, leave it flat to dry for about 30 to 45 minutes. Then you could go back with your process. But again, just make sure you're giving it enough support so it doesn't break off. There are on some of these some very intricate pieces, especially in your shadow boxes. So when you get to those, just be extra careful with those little pieces. Okay, so that got up into the hat area here, and that's what we were looking for. And here's my mess, so I'm going to clean that up real quick. So now that we've got the hat put on, now we can look at our snowman's face. So we want the face to sit. Remember, we marked our left and our right. I'm dyslexic, y'all, so bear with me as I do my lefts and rights. So right now, his face is going to sit just like this. What we want to make sure is that his hat and his scarf is going to cover any overlapping paper, and it is. Great job. Okay, so we're going to put those back away. We're going to Mod Podge this piece of paper onto his face. Now again, it overlaps here. We want to make sure we get any part that's overlapping. So on this particular piece, because we're overlapping our pieces, we're actually going to Mod Podge our paper before we put it on as well. We're going to Mod Podge here first, but I don't want to Mod Podge too far up, and it's kind of guessing game at this point. Because Mod Podge would make that paper look a little different. So what I want to do is take my Mod Podge and also just put it up to the edges of my paper so that it will adhere. Okay, so when I put that down, I'm going to focus on making sure I'm covering from side to side, just like so. If you think you missed any of these edges down here, before it dries too much, before you give your chance to second guess, just go ahead and put some additional down in there and press that down. Now, because that's on the board, you can just wipe that off, and we're going to be covering it up anyway. But when you get Mod Podge on paper, it gives it a different sheen, and I'm going to show you an example. Like, for example, if I got it on this, not meaning to, just inadvertently, as it dries, flip that over so it'll dry flat. As it dries, it's gonna take on a little bit different color. It's not horribly noticeable, but in the middle of a project, you put this much work into it, you don't wanna have a mishap. So tear that off so you can see it once it really dries. Okay. Next, again, we're working on the whole project at the same time. And sometimes that can get confusing and cumbersome, but we're now going to go back to where we started from the very beginning, working on this snowman piece right here. Remember, we had Mod Podged your base down, and we're going to get ready to Mod Podge the center piece down. So what we're going to do is we had glued this on here with our Mod Podge. It's hanging over just a little bit. So again, we're going to take our file and we're going to go straight down. Now this is a white core paper, so you'll see that white there. That's just the paper coming right off. You want the edges to be smooth so it will fit nicely into your frame. Again, grasp this firmly. If you start to have some redness in here or some soreness, you're not grabbing it firmly enough. Okay, so if you can run your hand across it, it's smooth. You shouldn't have any flaking paper. If you do, just go back over it. If you don't feel like you got a real good cut. Okay, so now we're going to distress around this. Oops. Sorry, guys. Here we go. We're going to distress, and I'm using a vintage photo again. We're going to distress around our edges. That gets rid of that white core paper. If you're a heavy distresser, you know, put as much ink on there as you like. I like to be able to see it. If I'm doing the work of putting the ink on there, I want to be able to see that it's there. And I like covering up that white paper edge. If you like that white paper edge, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just everyone's style is different. Everyone's taste is different. So you do what you like. Now this piece is meant to sit right inside this frame. See how there's a little bit of red on each side? If you want more red, that one's a little bit deeper. You trim that off some more. The main thing is that you center it in there and it's equal on all four sides. If you like it that way. That's the way that I preferred it, so that's the way that I did it. I'm going to just stress this before I glue it down. Now, on this portion, now that you've got your initial piece of paper Mod Podged to the wood, you can continue to use Mod Podge as your glue if you would like. However, you will need to start putting Mod Podge on the back of the paper and then stick it. Do not Mod Podge this whole thing and then stick, because what do you have then? You have sticky edges with discolored paper underneath. So at this point, I'm going to move from using the Mod Podge to using Zig two-way glue. I'm using a jumbo tip. It comes in different tip sizes, but it, again, goes on, I like it when it goes on blue. It dries clear, so you know it's still damp. In order to get more out the nozzle, you just pump it. I like it. It's not as messy as Mod Podge, and I don't have to use a brush. So there's a lot less cleanup. And while it's blue, it's still a little repositionable. You can move it around just a tad. Like Mod Podge, though, it will discolor your paper if you get it on something where it's not supposed to be. It will leave a little bit of a sheen on it. Okay, so I'm going to glue that down, make sure there's no bubbles, there's nothing going awry there, and voila, we have that piece. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside to let it dry. We'll come back to it here in a few minutes. We're still waiting for the snowman face probably to dry a little bit, so we're going to let him be for a minute. We're going to go back to our snowflakes. So our snowflake piece, yep, here we go, this piece, and this piece. We're still building this piece here. So we're going to do the exact same thing we just did with the snowman. These are now dry because we've had them out for a while. And I'm going to just shave off my edges. What I like about doing things in this order is while your paint is drying, you can still be working on something else. You don't get to the point that you're just literally sitting around waiting for paint to dry. I'm impatient that way, and I tend to make a mess out of my project because I'm waiting for paint to dry. So if I can keep busy doing something else, the paint drying issue doesn't catch up with me quite the same. Okay, again, clean off your work area. Now, for this piece, I trimmed it, and then I had to trim it a little bit more in order to get it to fit just the way I wanted to with that I Love Winter. I'm gonna go ahead and distress my pieces, and then we're gonna just glue that straight down. I have had a couple people ask me, can they use the adhesive that you scrapbook with, like Tombow adhesive or the gun adhesive like you use on scrapbooking. I actually glued that one to the wrong side. The answer is yes, you can. However, they don't hold quite as well on a long-term basis. So if this is something that you plan to use every single year, you don't want it to come apart. So you might as well put it together correctly to start with. So I suggest, you know, invest in just a little bit of Bonding Memories glue or Zig two-way glue adhesive. I have found that the glue sticks don't work quite as well long term. Again, I'm in Florida. Humidity is an issue here. You may not have that issue where you are, but if you put it together, I put it together for life. I don't like things to come apart. So while you could use those, I can't guarantee what kind of outcome. My shadow boxes have been together and through classes and people handling them for several years now, and I haven't had any issues with anything coming apart unless someone actually dropped on the floor and broke it. So these materials that I'm showing you, I know they work long term, and that's the goal I was looking for home decor, is I want it to last for as long as I want to use it. I'd rather something, I get tired of it and have to get rid of it, not because I broke it or because it's falling apart and I get frustrated with it. Okay, so for your snowflake, what we're going to do is actually glue this in place, let it dry, and then we're going to come back with Stickles. Now on these pieces, keeping the wood pieces together, I use Scotch tacky glue, and a corsage pen comes in handy sometimes. I know that doesn't happen to y'all, it only happens to me. Okay, you can use the Art Institute glitter glue. It takes a little bit longer to dry, but it will hold as well. I just happen to like this one, so I use it more than the rest. And you don't have to have a big glob on there, but enough to keep it where it's supposed to be. Make sure you know where you're going to put it. You do not want it to come off the edges, just like the paper didn't come off the edge. You do not want any of your embellishments to come off the edge either. You want them all to sit within your square. If they come off the edge at all, then it will not sit in your shadow box properly, and then you just have a mess. So make sure everything sits within the designated spaces. Okay, I'm gonna set this aside to let it dry, and eventually we're gonna come back and put our Stickles on it. I'm gonna go to the next snowflake, which was this one. Now this one, you'll notice I put the sticker down, then I put the snowflake on it. Okay, so we're gonna do the same process. We're gonna trim it off, and this time I actually am gonna do it over my trash can. So there's much other mess to clean up. I'm going to distress these edges. Now, if you have any pieces peeling up or anything like that, you'll want to fix that before you get too much further into the project. If you have something coming apart, get some more Mod Podge on it. before it comes undone. We make sure this is centered before we go to the problem, or to the, before we distress it. It does, it fits in there fine. So I'm gonna distress these pieces. And again, I'm just trying to get rid of that white pour paper. Give it a little bit of a vintagey look. My house is kind of vintagey looking, so that's what I enjoy. If you don't have to distress at all. It really depends. It's all on your personal preference. Again, we're using our zig glue that I can put on here. Stick that down so it's in the center. Now, I'm going to grab my sticker sheet and use this sticker right here that says, "Baby, it's cold outside." I thought that was super cute. And I happen to have a grandbaby, so to me it fits. If there's another sticker that you like better, you know, feel free to grab that. There's 4 or 5 there to choose from that all have cute little sayings on them. And again, depends on which part of the country as to what's going to fit better for you. We do not get anything freezing except for maybe a pipe here or there every once in a great while. So some of those don't really apply to where I'm at. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and stick this down so that when I go to put my snowflake down, if it does happen to overlap a little bit, at least this is already in place. Okay, so now I'm going to stick this where I want it to be. And I've got all kinds of room, so it doesn't have to overlap if I don't want it to. But I think it's kind of cute that it does. A little bit of tacky glue. You don't need a lot. Just enough to keep it in place. And then place it wherever you like. Now this glue does dry clear, so if you have any of it ooze out on you, not to worry, it will dry clear. Okay, I'm gonna set that to the side and let that dry. And in a moment, we'll put some stickles on those. Okay, so next, let's go back to our January. Again, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna go and file this off over my trash can, and then we're going to adhere our pieces, distress, and then adhere our pieces. This one might take me a couple minutes longer just because it's a bigger piece. This does fit the way that I want it to, so I have a chance to trim it if it doesn't. I'm going to distress this piece right here. place that upside down so I can work on it in a few minutes. Now I'm going to go back to my snowman. Okay, so now you can see I still have a little bit of white paper that has overlapped just a tad. So that's when this handy dandy smaller file can come into play, or your metal file, either one. If you use the larger file, more than likely you're going to get rid of all of the white paint on the side of his face. So I would not do that if you can help it. But if you don't have the smaller file, then you might have to do that. It's hard to get into these small spaces. And you can see even this one's taking some of the paint off, which is not a problem. Again, I like that distressed look, so it doesn't really bother me. But if you can go back and touch up your paint, you just want to be careful when you do that, not to get it onto your paper, because you can't get that off once it happens. So if you do decide to go back and touch up your paint, I would suggest doing it from the back side, not from the front, if that makes sense to everybody, so you don't get anything on your paper in error. You just have to be really cautious, but there we go. Okay, so we have sanded the edges of our snowman. Clean up my work area. This time I'm throwing that one away because I think we're done with it. Okay, now I'm going to take my distress tool and go back and just re-ink that edge because I don't like that raw paper edge. If you've got these small spaces that you're having a hard time getting into, there's a couple things that you can do. I use eyeshadow applicators a lot. So these are just, I buy them at the Dollar Tree or the Dollar General or whatever stores you got. It's just an eyeshadow applicator. They just have a plastic handle to them. They're nothing super fancy, but they do help you get into some of these spaces. And this one's got a lot of ink on it because I did a project with straight re-inker. So it's a little bit darker, but that's okay. We can do it on both sides and no one will ever know. There we go. So for those small areas, you can use that. I've also seen these Q-tip style ones. I don't like them quite as much because the cotton does eventually come off and they don't spread like an eyeshadow applicator. That's not what they're meant to do, but they will do the same thing and get into small areas. I like these because you can save them from time to time and use them. Usually the stem breaks before you get done with them, but you can use them several times, and there's like 20 of them for $1 or something is what you normally pay, so nothing too outrageous. Okay, so next, oh, that's that Mod Podge piece. See how it's discolored a little bit? I don't know if you can tell that much in the video, but you can see that sheen on there. That's why you don't want to get Mod Podge right onto your paper unless you're going to Mod Podge the whole thing. Okay, so the next step is to start placing where these pieces go so that we can start building our snowman. So, my Florida people, this may be the only snowman you get to build. So, let's make it count. I'm going to put a little bit of glue there. Now, you'll notice this does matter which way you put it. So, put him down where he's supposed to go. We're going to put a little bit of glue on the back of this one. Now this does hang over the edge a little bit, so you don't want to go all the way to the corner. Have him sit right there. If you're not sure where that's supposed to sit exactly, remember it's a cap, so it's wherever you sit, and the curved part goes down towards your face. It's that curvature of your face. This piece is for his scarf. And then this little thing is for his nose. It's adorable. Okay, so this was the hardest thing. You know, I debated with myself where the snowman nose is actually supposed to go. This is the one I did earlier that I painted. This is the one we just built with the paper. So it really depends on what you like as to what, you know, you want to do with yours. But you can change your mind at any point until you glue these down. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. Once you glue these down, it'll be hard to get in there and change that. You could paint over it, but it would be hard to go back to paper at that point. So now that we've glued all our pieces together there, we need this to dry. So we're gonna move this. And I also just realized I did not go back and distress his hat after I filed it off, guys. So I'm gonna do that real fast, being sure not to bump anything I just glued down. And I'll probably go back with that eyeshadow applicator right there. I don't know why I didn't notice that before, but there we go. Okay, I'm gonna set that aside to dry before I totally mess it up. And I'm gonna move back over to our January words. Okay, so this is how I finished mine out. And what I did was I glued my January word down. I did it back. First I put my stickers on without the stickles. I just put my stickers where I wanted them to be. And then I put my word January on. So here's our piece. It's dry now. We are going to glue down our stickers. We're gonna put our stickers where we want them to be. And then we're going to glue down our January. Okay, so I'm gonna grab my sticker sheet back. Now, I've done this before, so I know what the spacing is and I know it will fit. If you're trying to use a different sticker, you'll want to line up your January and figure out how it's going to fit on your page before you get too far into the process. Now, this one actually had a banner point on the end, but I wanted it to go right behind that mug, so I'm going to just stress my sticker because I don't want it to look just like everything else. And I'm going to grab my hot chocolate sticker and just stress around it. Whoa. There we go. If you handle it too much and it starts to lose its sticky off the back, just use your zig glue and glue it back down. Won't hurt anything. Okay, so I'm going to get this where I want it. And the cool thing about this sticker set, there's so many to choose from. And I really like the snowman, and there's a penguin, and you could add any of these to any of your pieces. Like if you didn't want to use 2 snowflakes, you could easily use a snowman or the Christmas tree or the penguin or whatever, if you choose to do so. Okay, so now we're going to glue down our word, and here I am going to make sure my spacing's good. Make sure you've got your U versus your N, just so I know kind of where everything goes. But now when I go to glue it down, I'm going to start with my Y. He has the biggest potential of falling off the wagon there, so I want to make sure he sits where he's supposed to. Again, you don't need a lot of glue. So I'm just going to start with him. And then you just want to make sure everything is spaced equally. The cool thing about tacky glue is you got a little bit of time to work with it also. So just focus on getting your glue in the center so that if you have to move it around, you got a little bit of wiggle room. Simply just going to glue those down, making sure I'm straight. There we go. So I've got everything glued where it's supposed to be. I'm going to set that to the side, and that way we can work on the next thing. Okay, so our snowman's drying, our January's drying, but y'all, you're so close to being done. You're gonna be amazed how fast this goes now that we've got our pieces going together. Okay, so our 2 snowflake pieces, what I did was, with both of my pieces, I literally took Stickles, and this is just a little container I put them in because they're starting to run out. So I just keep them upside down, but all I'm going to do is in a circular motion, add Stickles to my, oops, it's not quite dry, so be careful with it. It's going to take almost a full bottle to do these. I happen to have some left over from a class, so I'm trying to use up 2 portions of a bottle that I have before I open my new bottle up. But apply it in a circular motion. It's going to have to be kind of thick on there for it to dry and really have a good color. The other thing I liked about this particular Stickles color and why I chose it is you might be able to see it has like a goldy yellow color in it. And this is the Crystal Stickles is what it's called, is the name, which will go great with the rest of my project. Another reason why I chose the Fossilized Amber for my work in January. So using that circular motion, you're less likely to have any major gaps or holes. If you go back and forth, you're more likely to have a stripe somewhere that you really don't want on your project. If you see a hole and you're having a hard time filling it, like a space you didn't really get, wait for it to dry, and you can always go back and add more Stickles. Okay, so this is wet. My glue is still not totally dry. I'm going to totally set it aside. I would let that dry overnight. Do not try to get in a hurry. Stickles do not dry quickly. Dry. Okay, again, I'm gonna let this dry overnight. Okay, so later when I'm showing you where the magnets go and that kind of stuff, I'm using the ones that dried from my original sample. Okay, so we're gonna go back to our snowman. He's probably still wet as well and not totally dry yet, but we're gonna go ahead and glue him down just because we're getting to the end. He's done enough, I think. So I'm gonna take my tacky glue here. On the back of him. Again, you could use Mod Podge for this as well. I just like the tacky glue. It's just easier and I don't have to use that brush every time I turn around. Okay, so place my snowman where I want him to be. If you wanted to use another sticker, I'd put your sticker down first, you know, in the background or something. I would do that before you glue this down. And I didn't want him to be totally straight. You know, I want him to have a little bit of character to him. So next, to finish off my snowman, I did use a sticker from the sticker sheet and put here. I used quite a bit of Stickles. Okay, I should put that upside down. And then for these eyes, I used some black epoxy dots or enamel dots. It depends on what you call them. But I have tons of them. So I used those and a set of tweezers and literally just made him some eyes. And I love these. Foundations Decor put them out at one point in time. Some other companies have, but I love these for the eyes. It's super simple and I don't have to wait for anything to dry. So I use those with my tweezers and those go great. Okay, so here's some other things I did to my snowman, and they may not be super evident there on the camera, but I did give him some little rosy cheeks using Spun Sugar ink. I did add some Stickles just to give him some highlights, and I added a sticker there with some, and then added Stickles to the sticker. So I'm going to work on those processes right now. I'm going to just give him a little bit of pink to give him a, I don't know, just a little characteristic there. I'm going to use another one of, now this one I haven't used. I might have one already. I haven't used one for Spun Sugar in a while. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that down. Now Spun Sugar is a little bright, so you don't want to put it on too full strength. You might want to practice on a piece of scrap paper if you have one or something before you just, because this is your project. So see how I want it to be a little lighter than that. So I'm going to wipe some of that ink off of my applicator just so I can get down to where I'm giving him some color, but I don't want to give him too much color. I'm going to hold him in place, give him a little color. And yes, you could have done this before we glued him down, but there we go. I just want him to have a little rosy cheek thing going on just to give him some color. Also probably should have done it before I put his nose down, but there we go. So I gave my snowman a little bit of color, and actually I think he needs a little bit more on this one. There we go. The cool thing about paint is you can use your finger on paint and get a good application as well. Okay, so next thing, save that. We are going to get out our sticker sheet and find the sticker we want. So I use this sticker right here to make like almost a little brooch, I guess you could say, for his scarf here. Of course, you can pick whatever you want. And then I'm going to take the Stickles, and pardon me, but I'm trying to really use this up so I'm not wasting anything. What I did was I filled in each little dot, had a little dot of Stickles. I used to teach a lot of classes in person before COVID, so pardon me, I'm trying to use up some products I had from a class. Okay, there we go. So I put a dot on each of his polka dots. Now, if you decided to use a different paper, I'll show you in a minute. On the red piece, what we did is I literally just followed the lines in the paper. So I didn't have to do any extra work. I just had to follow what Echo Park had already done for me. And as you know with Stickles, it'll go on, it'll look like a little drop, but it flattens as it dries. So you're not going to get that peak out of it that you see there. As it dries, it is going to flatten some. But I basically just did this. I like a little bit of bling. I don't like too much bling, but I do like some. And that way, I don't know, give them a little extra oomph. Okay, and I just followed whatever lines were already there that were white, just to give me a pattern. But that's how I got that look. Now the only thing that's missing from this is you'll notice he has two little white dots right there. So I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm going to take our paint, remember we had wrapped it, and put just a little bit of a damp cloth over it. And I'm going to use my stylus. This is just a metal stylus. This is a close to my heart one. I've had it for forever. Some people, if you have a paper piercer, you could use the tip of that. A really super thin paintbrush works. But to me, these little metal ends work fantastic. I'm going to literally just dip them into the paint and apply a dot there and a dot there. And that's how I did that. Super simple, but it's a cute little effect. Gives him a little character. I'll put my paint right there. Okay, so this piece is done. It literally just needs to dry. Okay, so in a few minutes when we put our magnets on, I'll be using the sample I did earlier. So don't use the one, when we do our magnets, you want to watch or save the video and go back and watch it later. But when you see me do that, I'm not using the one that's still wet. Those Stickles do take a long time to dry. I'm setting them in a totally different area so I don't mess anything up. Okay, lastly, this is our January piece. So I am going to do Stickles on this, but I always do my Stickles the very last thing because I don't want to smear them. They take a while to dry, so I don't want to make a mess in the process of working on my project. And I still have a few more steps I want to do. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how I got a tone or a brown tone. You might be able to see it on the video there. I'm hoping that you can. I kind of deckled or speckled with brown. So there's a couple ways to do that. If I had done it before I glued my things down, I could have done it with a paintbrush and just kind of splattered. But to me, the easiest way to do it was to use my Distress ink and a sponge. So I'm just going to grab a piece of the sponge. So literally, I think this is the one I used. So I reuse these sponges. They come as a circle and I cut them into little pie pieces. And a little bit of re-inker. I just put it right here on my plate page. And I'm going to smear it around a little bit. I just want to get some ink onto it so that when I pat it out, now I'm not going to press. I'm just going to pat because I don't want it on the paper underneath. I only want it on the letter itself. And I'm not going to soak my sponge. You can see I have very little on there to start with. The more you put on there, the darker your letters are going to be. And I like this technique because it is a form of distressing. It's not complicated, but it gives, just like you did a whole bunch of work when really all you're doing is putting a little more ink on it. But I think it looks really cool and I like it. So here we go. Just gives a little bit more texture to your project. Now, if I mash too much, I get ink onto my paper and that's not my goal. So if you get a little bit on there, I don't think anybody really noticed, but if you get you don't want that shadow effect behind it. And again, this is going to take a little time to dry, so just bear with it. So in a few minutes when we talk about magnets, this is not the project I'm using, wait until that project is done. Now the cool thing about this is if you get too much on your project, you can wipe it off and start over. So you'll notice on this one I put a little bit more just because I like it a little bit more. But it's really up to you how strong you want that to be. Okay, we're gonna let that dry for a second. I'm gonna clean up this little mess. I love these mats. This happens to be a close to my heart mat. I was a close to my heart consultant for years and years and years. Tim Holtz makes the mats also. His is a great mat. The thing I like about the close to my heart ones, I think they still sell them. I'll put a link if they do. You'll see it's a non-skid surface on the back side of it, so it doesn't move on you. The Tim Holtz ones don't have that non-skid surface. You can put something non-skid underneath it and it wouldn't move. But I like this one just because it stays in place a little better than the others. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is we're waiting for this to dry. And I'm impatient, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to do the next technique. And then we're still going to go ahead and add our stickles. As long as we're not touching each other, we should not have a problem. But if I smear my hand over this, it's going to smear with me. Does that make sense? So what I want to do is open up my paints. And I'm going to be using my red paint right here. And I do want it to be, I need to get a paintbrush just to mix it up a little better. It's separated a little bit while we were working on other things. So if I had a really small paintbrush, I could do this with a paintbrush, what we're about to do with the dots. And all I'm doing is making these 3 little dots on each letter. You can use either end, or you could even mix between the two if you wanted to. Just get enough paint on there and dab. Makes perfect little circles, and they're equal, which is even better. Now I do dip my stylus in each time because I want my dots to be equal. If I tried to just go dot, 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 eventually I run out of paint, the dot's going to get smaller. So there we go. There's our dots. We're all set. And lastly, all we have to do is add some stickles. So I added stickles on the different snowflakes here on the background paper. And then I also added some here on the snowflake and on the whipped cream topping. So I'm just going to be adding those. Then literally I just put a drop. And this paper was randomly cut out of the piece that was there. There's nothing special about it. So if you use the same paper, yours may not look exactly like mine, but you should still have plenty of snowflakes to dot if you're going to do that. There's also stars on the paper, so you could do the stars. They're kind of small, but you could dot those as well if you wanted to. So you have just finished all of your pieces. Congratulations. So the next step after they're dry, so tomorrow or late tonight, if it's early in the morning, later this evening, once everything's dry, and of course the only way to know if stickles dry is to what? Put your finger in them. Or if you notice they're flat. So when they first go on, there's a peak when you put them on. But as they dry, they flatten out. So if you notice that they're flat, that's a good way to tell that they're definitely dry. The other way to tell is by, putting your stylus in them and see if they move, but then you might create a hole. So you just want to be careful on how you do that. Magnets. Now you get, in your kit, you'll get 5 magnets. 2 are for this piece. So you're just going to flip it over. These literally just peel off and stick onto your area. Now the whole back of your frame is magnetic, right? So if this is the first time you've put your frame together, we'll show you, or if you've not put your whole system together yet, I'll show you how to do that. This piece only needs 1. Now I know it's big, I know it has a lot on it, but trust me, it only needs 1. And I think you could probably get by with 1 on your January, but they send us 2, so we're going to use the 2. Now remember, these are the ones I did yesterday. These are not the ones I did today. So they are dry. So make sure yours are dry. There we go. And I'm going to go grab my frame. There's that. There we go. That's what yours are going to look like when they get done, or something similar. We are going to be doing all January through December. If you want to follow along, I probably will not wait and do them in the month like this January did. I had to wait for some products to come in. So I'm going to try to catch up. The next one I'll be doing is the February calendar, and I will be using a paper by Echo Park called Cupid & Company. It's new out for this year, so you should be able to still grab it. There'll be some links below as well. So that'll be the next one I'm working on. But follow along with us. I think that one will be a lot of fun. Okay, so in your magnetic calendar frame, again, these are the ones I did yesterday. This is what comes with your calendar. So this is to put on the back so that you can hang it on your wall if you wish to. And then you have all these magnetic tiles. Now the magnetic tiles that come with it, you can use these blank tiles to fill in the spaces that are not needed for your month. Okay, so for example, for January 2021, the first actually fell on a Friday, right? So you're going to move your spaces to make that appropriate. I'm gonna set those over to the side. So these would be blank because there are no days there. Now you could just leave them empty if you wanted to, but they've given you the tiles to fill it in for your blank spaces. Then all these extra, you've got extra tiles as well, and you can use those to make your icons. So there's one for Valentine's Day, so on February 14th, or on your wedding anniversary, you can make a tile, and because they sit up out of the frame, you can add to it. You could also do like a little picture if it's somebody's birthday. That's what we do at my house. This is going to be our Happy New Year's. So we're actually going to make one, not going over the one, but one for Happy New Year's. Is going to go here, and it's going to be in my yellows and blues. So it goes with some other stuff in my series. Probably some Stickles in there somewhere. Of course, you got 4th of July, Father's Day. This could be Dad's birthday if you don't celebrate Father's Day, if that's not something applicable for you. If you don't celebrate Halloween, you don't have to do that one, of course. My plan is to do the ones, like for this one for Valentine's Day, I'm going to do it when I do my February calendar because I want it to be out of paper that matches the rest of my theme. If I want a birthday one, these are super simple, just little squares. If I want a birthday one for each picture, for each person, I can get a little square to Craft and Hobby Store, or I can use these instead of using them for my icons. Now they do have an extra set of icons as well that you can purchase in order to just keep updating more of your calendar. But this is what I plan to do, is to use the ones that are here, and I'm going to decorate them with each calendar month so that my stuff coincides and all matches together. Okay, so that's how this works. I'm going to go ahead and take these off. Now these are on with glue dots, and Foundations Decor picks some really good glue dots. You don't want to break your pieces, so use your file and get up underneath them if you have to, because you don't want to break them off. First I thought I just had wimpy fingers, but they are on there really well. Okay, so once you get your glue dots off, then all you're simply going to do, we've already put the magnets on our project. So then all you're literally going to do is set these in your spots, and your calendar is complete. There we go. So you can use it year after year, and it just makes a great gift or a great for your home. I actually set mine up on a shelf. I've got a picture shelf that I put mine up on. And it coordinates with a lot of the other projects that we've done for Foundations Decor as well, which you can find under Winter with Foundations Decor, anything we've done in the past, prior 2020 or prior to that. So you can go back and look at some of those, but we do make them to coordinate with each other. And if you need anything at all, feel free to email me at Sherry@Scrapbooking.Life. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. Hope you enjoyed today's video.